Hello, my name is Will Hall. I'm the Chief Creative Officer at RAIN and Professor of Design and Technology at NYU. And it seems to me that essentially every third article that's written these days has something to do with the rise of the machines. I travel all the time, and I feel like every newsstand I go to, I'm greeted by this wall of magazines with robots slapped on the cover. I don't know what that is. I don't want to know what that is. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we're a tech-forward group, let's say, and so, most of us, we look at these articles and it's somewhat laughable, most of the things that are said there. But the thing is that when you look at the technologies that are driving so many of these headlines, we know that these aren't just buzzwords, but rather they contain within them the very real seeds of innovation, transformation, disruption. I mean, we know that in AI, $16 trillion is going to be added to the global GDP over the next 20 years, right? I mean, these are transformative moments in time. We at RAIN, in fact, work with 23 of the Fortune 100 brands around voice and conversational AI. And if I were to sum up their collective sentiment, it's like, yeah, we know these are things, but we don't know where they're going. And so by extension, we don't really know where to start. Said simply, where do you begin? I'm not a futurist. I don't have a tinfoil hat. I will never want that in my home, neither today nor in the future. But there is a principle I've seen that I believe has given us a reasonable and reliable roadmap for where these technologies are going. And it's a principle that I call steeper and deeper, and it works like this. If you take something like the internet, so I grew up in the States, and my first time online, like supposedly probably most of you, was on a desktop computer with a 14.4 modem. No duh. And a stolen AOL disk that I stole from my neighbor. That's fine. But if we were to speak to someone in China, and if we were to ask them to tell us about their first time online, more than likely it wouldn't start with a desktop, but rather with a mobile device. And in fact, today we know that almost 98% of Chinese internet traffic is mobile. Here in the States, we very rightly talk about a mobile-first internet, and China is basically mobile-only. Said differently, they're kind of already at where we're vectoring to. We're getting closer every single year to where they are. And so if I were to sum up the sort of adoption of a mobile-first internet in an overly simplistic and cartoonish graph, it might look something like this. Our adoption of a mobile-first internet looks something like this. Mobile is obviously transformed incredibly quickly, but compared to China, it's steeper and deeper. Steeper meaning faster, deeper meaning more fully integrated and at a greater scale. And the thing is that once you start to do that, you realize that this has radical and cascading implications. When you have a mobile-first internet, it means the internet itself has to change. Accordingly, when you look at the companies that have risen to prominence in China, you have Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent's sub-brand called WeChat. These organizations are called super apps. We work with Alibaba, that one in the middle. I was on the stock exchange floor when they went public. It was the largest IPO in the history of the stock market, a completely surreal moment in time. And the thing that struck me as hilarious is you heard Bloomberg and all these people trying to explain what is this super app. And they're like, well, they're like eBay in China. Not quite. They're like PayPal in Asia. Not really. They're everything. In fact, we just said, call us the ecosystem. We're absolutely everything. We think of these companies as a thin layer of technology, as a thin layer that connects everything to everything else and everybody to everybody else. Literally anything you go to do in a given day is enabled by that. I have a graduate student who's studying abroad, and she shot me an email. She's like, I can't buy food without WeChat. What do I do? How does money work? Everywhere. And it's funny because we have our big tech companies too. Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc. These are essentially becoming super apps. Every single thing I read in a press release they do, I kind of snap my fingers like, yep, there's that super app they're building. There we go. We're getting one step closer to China. Every single day you're seeing a consolidation of users around these nodes, and those nodes enabled by a mobile-first internet are existing across multiple vectors and multiple verticals of society. And again, so if you were to look at this sort of overly simplistic adoption, you see, our big tech has happened quickly, but again, compared to China, steeper and deeper. And I'll just hit on this one more. When you do that, and you have this consolidation of users, it means the data you get is significantly more rich. Here in the States, we're doing some phenomenal stuff with big data. We work with BlackRock. They manage $9.2 trillion of retirement assets. They're using big data in true ways, truly big data sets to do phenomenal things. But compared to what's happening in China, I would argue it's not even close. You guys are tech forward, so I know that you probably know this guy. His name's Kai Fu Lee. He was the former president of Google China. And he had this to say about the data that's happening in Asia.
You need a lot of data, and China has so much data. So in the age of AI, I often talk about data is the new oil, and China is the new Saudi Arabia. So China has all the data, not only more people, but more depth. because so many services are digitized.
So much data, he says. But it's really true. Everything is digitized. Everything is bleeding data. Every single thing is given a higher purpose because it's not just the thing. It's a thing that's giving data that's connecting to every single thing else. So again, the rise of big data is steeper and deeper. You can see this over and over again. Look at the way that payments are happening. Look at the things that are happening in mobile. Look at the way that social and e-com are blending. Pick a topic, look to China, and I think it gives us very often a reasonable roadmap. Said simply, if you want to know where big tech is going, look no further than to China. I consider China to be a bit of a distorted crystal ball. I think the word distorted is super important. In no way am I saying that we are China, is Asia, is Europe, is etc. That being said, there are principles I see when I look into that distorted crystal ball that transcend region, race, and everything that I think we can apply and learn from right now today. I'm going to share 2 of those with you and then we'll get out of here. The first principle I see is that systems win. You're tech forward, so you may know this guy, but I love the history of the internet. And my favorite guy in the history of the internet is this guy. His name is the Cloner. He famously, his business model for many years is he would go to Silicon Valley, he would look at whatever the darling was, and he would copy it and he would take it to China. So he took Reddit and he took it to China. He took YouTube and he took it to China. He took Facebook and he took it to China, and he copied it so completely, in fact, that in the footer it even said, "This is a Mark Zuckerberg production." Shameless. He also copied Yelp with his parody product called Dianping. And this was the early 2000s, and as you might imagine, our friends at Yelp didn't exactly take too kindly to this. But at the same time, there is a bit of Silicon Valley hubris, let's say, and they said, well, look, who cares? We're Yelp. Who can do Yelp better than Yelp? We're Yelp. We'll just go to China. We'll beat them at our own game. But there's a principle that they had not accounted for, and it's called go heavy. And it's something that I am obsessed with. I'm going to get shirts with this on it. And it works like this. On day one, both they and Yelp and Dianping had essentially the same product. A page where it had ratings and reviews. It's kind of where Yelp stopped. But Go Heavy never stops. Go Heavy is an obsessive that continues to ask, what else, what else? I said, well, look, if people are looking for ratings and reviews, they probably want to buy food. So in order to do that, we need to set up some sort of payment system. So they started to work with the restaurants to incentivize them to be on their system. They built out essentially their own PayPal, their own HubSpot, their own Grubhub, essentially, that had to order and you could sort of deliver your products. And then what they found through the data is if you couldn't get the food to people in 20 minutes or less, they wouldn't use your product. So, of course, they then built a fleet of smart scooters, obviously. This is ridiculous. Think about what would go into this. Tens of thousands of smart scooters being charged, the manpower, the HR, everything that would go into this. And then they went a step further and they started to put data sensors into these things. And then they went even further and they started to get some of the most robust traffic pattern data that existed. They even went so far as to petition to the government to build traffic lanes for their food cars. Are you hearing what I'm saying? This is crazy. Who reorganizes the way Beijing works around a food app? This is absurd. I would contend that the folks at Yelp thought they were fighting a man. You were not fighting a man, you were fighting a beast. This is not what normal people do. In China, there's a saying that when you win, you don't declare victory, you declare war. And go heavy are the tactics of that warfare. As a result, it's made them intensely resilient. And by the way, they won. When you look at, I love this exit quote from the CEO of Yelp, Jeremy Stoppelman. He said, look, the exit from China allowed us to do what we do best, ... build the Yelp app. I don't want scooters. I'm not trying to build roads. I'm not trying to petition nothing. We're out. But as a result, if you were being really generous, you maybe could say Yelp is worth maybe $1 billion. I don't get that evaluation. I'm not buying any Yelp stock. I think they're essentially a feature set at this point, if Jeremy's in the room, sorry. But conversely, Dianping is worth pre-IPO valuation of $55.5 billion. They're one of the biggest unicorns that exist today. And it's because of that system thinking. And it's funny because you see this in a lot of our big tech. I mean, Netflix essentially was a parody. I mean, I'm sure many of you have been given the same briefs I had. I can't tell you how many streaming video service briefs I've been given in my career. It's a commodity. But Go Heavy says, let's build our own Hollywood. Is there a more Chinese company than Amazon? They vertically integrate everything. They go horizontally and vertically all the time. Our clients at Alibaba said, yeah, Jeff Bezos, the most Chinese entrepreneur there is. There's a reason he's was the richest man on earth. But it's so funny because people tend to look at this and say, well, yeah, but that's what big tech does. But we sell cat food or whatever your brand does. But I believe, and I believe I'm right on this, is that every company, regardless of your industry, is a tech company, whether you realize it or not. It might be in disguise. And if that's true, and if you buy that, what you realize is tech companies don't sell cat food, they build systems. And that's all they do. It's all about systems. And in our world of voice, when I tell my mom that I work in voice, inevitably this is the image that comes to mind, smart speakers. Sure, yes, fine, I love smart speakers. We actually made the first skill that was on the platform. We've made hundreds, I don't even know how many at this point. So yeah, we're all about these speakers. But these speakers are a rounding error on the larger world that is voice. If you remember nothing from our talk today, I would argue the following slide is probably the most important. If you've ever heard me talk about voice, you've seen this slide because this is the only thing that really matters, and is that to win at voice, you have to think in systems. To win at voice, you have to think in this ecosystem sort of an approach. It's what we call and technology, because voice directly and profoundly affects your mobile and your e-com, anywhere where you're transacting, as well as your website, your SEO, your SEM, your content, as well as, yeah, of course, there's 150 million some odd speakers that are in market today, as well as any physical locations all working together as one cohesive mesh. A lot of brands go off the rails right here because they don't think in systems. They throw a half-assed skill in the store and wonder why it doesn't work. A skill without a system is like a keyboard without a computer. It's meaningless. But the more you can make those things connect together, the more it can transform your business. An example I would use would be the work that we've done with Starbucks. You know, within Starbucks, they have more payments transacted through their app than all of Apple Pay. It's kind of astonishing how much is being transacted every day. I saw something recently about how much money is being currently held up in coffee gift cards. It's something on the order of the GDP of Venezuela. It's kind of absurd. So within that, we actually, with our partner, developed an NLP so that if you order a triple grande macchiato in a venti cup, which I would never do because I'm not a pretentious ass, but if I did, it would understand what I meant, reconcile it to how much it cost, to my location, etc., building out that reconciliation layer. And because of that, we were then well postured to be in those speakers. So you could, on your way to work, you order your coffee, it pays for it in the app in your pocket, you go, you skip your line, and you go. Then what we found is that in their physical locations, all the data wasn't speaking to each other. So we started to reconcile data sets to build out this thin layer so that anywhere you were, anywhere in the world, it knew exactly where you were and how much it cost. And because of that, that's how allowing us to actually innovate in ways that are really meaningful. For them, the car. This makes a ton of sense. I'm on my way to work, my hands are on the wheel, I freeform order my triple grande macchiato in a venti cup, which pays for it in my app in my pocket, which updates the GPS. When I'm 7 minutes away, it sends my order, I skip my line, I grab my coffee, and I go. System with a side of system. And it's funny because it's easy to look at examples like this and say, well, yeah, but I mean, that's Starbucks, and it's this sort of global physical and digital thing, but I can't really like play there. By the way, that system has made them intensely resilient. There should be nothing more commodifiable than a cup of coffee. But that system has made it where we can't really start a coffee company and compete with them because of that system. But systems are really the way to think about this. You know, another example I'd give you would be the work that we've been doing with Nike. You know, for anybody who's seen Back to the Future, the self-lacing shoe, this is the Nike Adapt Air BB. This is that shoe's great-great-grandson. And we actually helped launch this live on television. So working with Nike and RGA, we actually integrated live into a live telecast of the Lakers and Celtics game about a month and a half ago. And then all throughout the telecast, there were voice prompts that were happening in the lower third where you could ask Google Assistant, what's Kuzma wearing? Or what's the future of basketball? Or what's this, what's that? Learning about the product, creating the second screen, second voice sort of experience. But then at halftime, we actually dropped the shoe in Charles Barkley's hand, physically in hand, and then you were able to just simply say, yeah, I want to order that shoe right there in real time through voice that then was fulfilled by their app in real time. And under 30 seconds, we sold out of their entire inventory. Immediately, almost immediately. And it's funny because I've spoken with hundreds of brands, and inevitably, the first question they ask us is, how do I sell stuff? I just want to sell stuff. I've heard that voice is going to transact $40.2 billion. How can we do that? Yeah. Systems, that's how you do it. They sold out immediately. Ladies, fellas, here's why I'm showing you this. Everybody wants to look like a bodybuilder, but nobody wants to go to the gym. You know what I mean? Everybody wants to sell stuff, but the way you sell stuff is building these ecosystems. The way you make voice meaningful is building interconnected ecosystems, and that requires discipline in your data, discipline in your design, and discipline in your brand. To win at voice, you have to think in systems. So the last thing I'll leave you with is that voice leads. This is significantly shorter. We talked about earlier how the internet in China is mobile first and bordering on mobile only. So the research work that I've been doing at NYU is looking at the comparative adoption of technology across societies and seeing the effects that it has. And it's actually quietly kind of profound. One of the things that you're realizing is that within that, voice is becoming increasingly the default input mechanism. This is a screenshot from WeChat. And here you can see how hold to talk, i.e. voice, is taking prominence over it. We're talking about first order, second order, third order retrievability. Voice is first order retrievability. Everything is vectoring that way. This has huge implications. I'm not even going to get into all of them right now. If you want a keyboard, you actually have to press that and then press another button. Voice is becoming that default input mechanism. You say, well, yeah, but the Chinese language is so much more complicated. Yes, I'm aware of this. However, what you're seeing is, if you get a deck from Amazon, we wrote part of that deck, and on the first slide it says, voice is a new behavior, a new technology, and a new category. And the idea of a new behavior, what you realize is when people start to realize, I can just talk to this thing and it understands me, well, now everything is changing. And in fact, every single day, 38 billion daily voice input messages are happening in WeChat every single day. And because that new behavior is happening, now you're seeing how Tencent's marketplace is defaulting to voice search. You're seeing how Alibaba's marketplace is defaulting to voice search. You're seeing how this is completely taking over. And in fact, this is a stat that everybody talks about voice. That half of all search is going to be done through voice by 2020. The part that everybody leaves out, asterisk, in China. And in China, that's completely already happening. In fact, we're well beyond that in many ways. And again, it's easy to say, but yes, that's China. The fact of the matter is we're following that same curve. You want to talk about steeper and deeper? We're following the exact same trajectory. Our mobile part of the internet, 30% of mobile search is being done through voice. That's up from 22% last year, which is up from 15% the year before. It's happening, and it's happening incredibly quickly. And I know we're tight on time, so I'll wrap this up. But I think that the sort of thing that I've learned out of this is that when voice does its job well, it tends to become that preferred input mechanism. This is exactly what you're seeing in China. This is exactly what you're seeing with voice search. And I'm going to give you one example and one less obvious example that I've personally been surprised by. Here's the obvious example. No duh, you can ask Alexa what the weather is. I'm glad we're all sitting down for that. But what the data is showing is that people who ask Alexa for the weather stop going to the app, and you sure enough don't go to the weather channel. It becomes that preferred input mechanism. We kind of all know this. Here's what I didn't realize. When you start to include voice and other things, it also happens. So for example, when we included voice into our Starbucks app, what we found is people who ordered through voice, they stopped pressing buttons. They stopped using the interface as it was intended. So voice is changing the way the entire app works. When voice does its job well, it takes over. You mentioned Erica. I'm curious how that's going to change their larger ecosystem. It will have implications. We saw the same thing with the NFL and the fantasy sports platform. When voice does its job well, it tends to take over. We made a skill and everybody thought it was just this piece of technology that was over there. What we found is that people who used our skill, they stopped going to the site and they stopped going to the app because it did its job really well. When voice does its job well, it tends to take over. And the way to think about that from a brand perspective is to find assistive moments. We advise brands to find the moments you want to know, go, buy, or do. If you do that, I think you'll have profound impact on not only voice, but really the entire ecosystem. The gentleman before me spoke on Tide, so I'll not mention that, but it's a good example. It's work that we did, and I think it's a good use of finding that assistive moment for voice. I'll sort of leave you with this. I think that basically this is where we're at. I think that as we vector towards from a desktop first world to a mobile first, to voice first, to context first, I think this is probably the trajectory. I see this kind of going. And I think China is more or less here, and I believe we're about there. I think the implications of that are pretty important. The voice and technology just being ambient and everywhere, everything being personalized, and me in some ways being the interface itself. So those are the two things I wanted to share with you. For a number of other principles we will not get into. But I think, again, systems win, thinking in interconnected systems, and knowing when you do voice, it tends to take over. If you'd like to find out more about these or other things, certainly shoot us a note. We have a newsletter we'd be happy to sign you up for. Thank you so much.